The cafe on Nova Station was never truly quiet. Even in the late hours, there was always the sound of machines humming, footsteps echoing in the hallways outside, and the faint chatter of travelers waiting for their next shuttle. Yet, for Alara, the night shift always felt different from the day. The daytime rush was full of noise, impatient orders, and hurried customers. At night, the cafe seemed calmer, the lights a little softer, and the air a little warmer. It was during these hours that she noticed him. He came every night just before closing. Tall, broad-shouldered, and always dressed neatly, he walked with a steady pace, as if time did not matter to him. His dark hair was always in place, his eyes sharp but distant, and he never carried anything except a small device clipped to his belt. He would step up to the counter, meet her gaze briefly, and order the same thing every single time. Black coffee. No sugar. Alara would prepare it quickly, sliding the steaming cup across the counter. He would take it without a smile, without small talk, and then choose the same corner table at the back. From there, he would sit in silence, holding the cup between his hands, but rarely drinking it quickly. Sometimes he stared out the window into the endless black of space. Sometimes he scrolled through something on his wrist communicator. But mostly he just sat there. The first few nights, Alara assumed he was like many of the station's late-night visitors, someone working a quiet shift, maybe a technician from one of the docking bays or a security officer taking a break. But after weeks passed and his routine never changed, she began to wonder who he was. She had served plenty of regular customers before, but none as silent, as constant, and as mysterious as him. The cafe's few other nighttime customers noticed. Him too. A group of cargo loaders would whisper about him when he walked in. A couple of station guards would glance at him now and then. Still, no one approached him. There was something about the way he carried himself, calm yet guarded, that made people keep their distance. One night, during a slow hour, Alara decided to pay more attention. As she wiped down the counter, she watched the way he sat. His posture was straight, not like someone tired from work. His clothes were clean and well-made, not the kind of uniform worn by station workers. And his hands, steady, precise, with no signs of rough labor, told her he was not someone who fixed machines or loaded crates for a living. Whoever he was not here because he had nowhere else to go. Still, he never spoke more than necessary. No greetings, no goodbyes, no thank you beyond a polite nod. He seemed like a man made of secrets. One evening, a small incident broke the usual silence. A young boy, no more than 8 or 9 years old, came into the cafe looking lost. Alara looked up from the coffee machine and was about to speak to him when the man in the corner stood up and crossed the room in a few quick steps. He crouched down to the boy's level and spoke in a low voice that Alara could not hear. The boy's worried expression softened, and he followed the man out into the hallway. A minute later, the man returned alone, sat back down, and continued, his quiet routine as if nothing had happened. That moment stayed in Alara's mind. Whoever he was good with children, and he had acted without hesitation. Yet when he returned, he gave no sign that anything unusual had happened. A week later, her curiosity grew even stronger. She decided to try starting a conversation. When he ordered his coffee, she asked, "Busy night?" It was simple, casual. He looked at her for a moment, as if weighing whether to answer, then said, "Not too busy." His voice was deep, calm, and careful. That was all. No details, no invitation for more questions. The way he guarded his words made Alara even more curious. She thought about asking where he was from, what work he did, or why he always came at the same time. But something about his quiet manner told her that direct questions would only push him further away. Later that night, she noticed something she had not before. When he stood up to leave, his eyes flicked toward the cafe's entrance, scanning the area in a way that felt more like security training than habit. It was quick, almost unnoticeable, but Alara caught it. Then he gave her a small nod and walked out, disappearing into the station's main corridor. Days passed, and the same pattern continued. He came, ordered his coffee, sat in his corner, and left without fuss. Yet Alara began to notice more small details. His shoes were never scuffed. His jacket had a subtle emblem she did not recognize, stitched near the shoulder. Sometimes his communicator would buzz, and his expression would shift for a split second, before returning to calm. It was as if his life outside the cafe was full of tension that he left at the door. Then one night, something unusual happened. The cafe was nearly empty when a pair of alien traders walked in. They were tall, with pale skin and long, dark robes. They glanced around before their eyes, landed on him. Instead of ignoring him, they walked straight over and gave a small bow of respect. Alara froze in place, surprised. The man nodded politely but did not stand. They spoke to him in a language she could not understand, and he responded quietly, his tone measured. The traders bowed again and left without ordering anything. When Alara returned to cleaning the counter, she realized her heart was beating faster. Whoever he was not just another quiet customer. The way those traders treated him, it was as if he was someone important. Very important. That night when he left, Alara found herself watching him go with a dozen new questions in her mind. She had no answers yet, but she knew one thing for certain. This man was not here just for coffee. The next few nights felt different for Alara. The cafe was still the same, with its soft hum of machines and the faint scent of roasted coffee beans, but her attention was sharper. Every time the door slid open, she found herself glancing up, half expecting him to appear, and every time he did, she noticed more. The man was always precise. He arrived within the same 5-minute window each night, as if following an invisible schedule. His order never changed, his tone never wavered, and his seat in the corner remained his quiet place. But now, after seeing the alien traders bow to him, Alara could not see him the same way. She wondered why someone important would spend his nights in a small cafe instead of in a private lounge or an expensive restaurant. One evening, when the cafe was busier than usual, he arrived and took his usual place. As Alara prepared his coffee, she overheard a conversation at a nearby table. Two dock workers were talking in low voices about a major cargo company on the station. They spoke of a CEO named Kyle Veyran, a man who owned one of the largest interstellar shipping networks. In this sector, they said he rarely appeared in public, that he preferred to keep his movements quiet, and that some even called him the ghost director because no one knew much about his personal life. The name echoed in Alara's mind. Kyle. Could it be him? She thought about the way the alien traders treated him, the emblem on his jacket, the quiet authority in his presence. It fit too well to be coincidence. But if it was true, why would a man like that spend his nights alone in a small cafe, drinking simple black coffee? Later that night, when the crowd thinned, she decided to try again to speak to him. She brought his coffee to the table instead of calling him to the counter. "You come here a lot?" she said with a small smile. "Do you work nearby?" For a moment, he simply looked at her, as if trying to decide what kind of answer she expected. "Something like that," he replied, his voice calm and even. "I spend most of my time on this station." It was not much, but it was more than she usually got. "Must be a busy job," she said as she set the cup down. "It can be," he said, then gave a polite nod before turning his attention to the dark window beside him. Alara walked back to the counter, pretending to focus on cleaning, but her thoughts stayed on him. His words were few, but they carried a weight, as if each one was chosen carefully. She had met plenty of people who talked too much, filling the air with stories to hide their truth. This man did the opposite. His silence felt like a shield. A few nights later, something happened that gave Alara a better glimpse into his life. The cafe was quiet, with only a handful of customers, when the station lights flickered. A low alarm began to sound, a soft, warning tone used for technical issues. She glanced toward the hallway and saw Cale already standing, scanning the room. His expression was calm but alert. Through the door, 2 station engineers hurried past, speaking into their comms about a power relay malfunction. The lights returned to normal within a minute and the alarm faded, but Cale did not sit back down immediately. Instead, he stepped outside for a moment, speaking quietly into his communicator before returning to his seat. Alara served him his coffee, curiosity bubbling inside her. "You looked like you knew exactly what to do," she said. He gave a faint smile, the first she had seen from him. "Old habits," he replied. "When you've spent enough time on ships and stations, you learn to pay attention to the signs." She wanted to ask if he was in security or station operations, but something told her he would not answer directly. Still, that small smile stayed in her mind long after he left. Over the next week, Alara began to notice patterns. Some nights he came alone, as usual. Other nights, she saw him enter the station with a boy, probably no older than 9, who had the same sharp eyes and dark hair. The boy never came inside the cafe, always heading off toward another hallway with a small group of security personnel. Cale would watch him until he disappeared from sight before stepping inside for his coffee. Alara's curiosity deepened. Who was the boy to him? A younger brother? A relative? Or perhaps a son? The thought stayed in her mind, and the more she considered it, the more it made sense. The night she had seen him help the lost child, his reaction had been instant and natural, like someone used to looking after children. Then came the night when her suspicion grew even stronger. Cale arrived later than usual, his jacket slightly out of place, his hair a little messier than she had ever seen. He ordered his coffee but barely touched it. Instead, he sat with his communicator on the table, glancing at it every few minutes. He seemed distracted, his gaze occasionally shifting toward the cafe's entrance. When a small alert sounded from his device, he read it quickly, then stood up. "Thank you for the coffee," he said, his voice brisk but polite. "I have to. Go." He left without finishing his drink, disappearing into the hallway at a faster pace than usual. Alara watched him go, her mind full of questions. Something about the way he moved told her this was more than just a casual errand. Later that night, when her shift ended, she passed through the main concourse and caught sight of him again. He was standing near the docking bays, speaking to a man in a formal suit while the young boy from before stood beside him. The boy clutched a small bag, looking tired but safe. Cale placed a hand on his shoulder in a protective way before guiding him toward one of the private lifts. Alara slowed her pace, keeping her distance. She could not hear their words, but the image was clear enough. This was his son, and whatever. His life was outside the cafe. It was far from ordinary. As she returned to her quarters that night, Alara realized that every answer she found only brought more questions. Who was Cale Veyron to the galaxy beyond these station walls? Why did he choose her cafe as his quiet place? And what kind of life did a man like him truly lead? She had no way of knowing then, but she was already part of a story much bigger than a cup of coffee. Morning on Nova Station was different from the quiet hours Alara knew. The corridors filled with the sound of traders calling prices, ships docking and undocking, and announcements echoing through the intercom. Alara preferred her night shift, but sometimes she stayed late to help restock supplies. It was during one of these mornings that she heard his name again, this time from a more reliable source. The cafe's owner, a cheerful older man named Denrick, was speaking to a supplier near the back counter. "Yes, Kyle Veyron," Denrick said, lowering his voice slightly. "Runs the entire Veyron interstellar fleet. They say he has enough credits to buy half the station, and yet Here he is every night, drinking coffee in my little shop." The supplier laughed, thinking it a joke, but Alara froze. There it was, the same name she had overheard before. Her guess had been right. The quiet man in the corner was Cale Veyron, CEO of one of the largest shipping companies in the galaxy. She tried to picture him in that role, commanding meetings, making deals worth millions, speaking to officials from dozens of worlds. But it was strange. In the cafe, he never looked like a man who carried such power. Here, he looked like someone trying to disappear into the background. That night, Kyle came in at his usual time. Alara served him his coffee, but now she noticed more than ever how tired his eyes looked. It was not the kind of tiredness that came from a bad night's sleep. It was the deep kind, built from years of pressure. She wanted to say something, but before she could, the cafe door opened and a boy walked in. It was the same child she had seen near the docking bays. His steps were quick, and his eyes lit up when he saw Cale. The boy went straight to him, and Cale's serious expression softened instantly. "Taryn," Cale said warmly, and the boy slid into the seat beside him. Alara busied herself at the counter, pretending not to watch, but she could hear some of their conversation. "How was your lesson?" Kyle asked. "Good," Taryn replied. "I finished my star map early. Teacher said I can work on the advanced one now." Kyle nodded with pride. "That is excellent. You always do your best." It was such a simple exchange, yet Alara felt a quiet truth in it. This was not just a business leader. This was a father, and not a distant one either. Kyle paid attention to every word his son said. When Taryn left with a member of the security team, Cale stayed a little longer than usual. Alara took the chance to speak. "Your son seems very smart," she said. Cale looked at her for a moment, as if surprised she had noticed. "He is. Smarter than I was at his age. I try to make sure he has what he needs." There was something in his tone, an unspoken weight, that made Alara think he was not just talking about school supplies or lessons. She wondered how hard it must be to raise a child in a life so public and so demanding. That thought stayed in her mind until the following week, when Cale came in looking more exhausted than she had ever seen him. His jacket was still neat, but there was tension in his shoulders, and his eyes had the distant look of someone carrying too much at once. She served his coffee and asked quietly, "Long day?" He hesitated, as if deciding whether to answer. "A long year," he said at last. "The company is growing, and there are problems that never seem to end, and—" He stopped himself, glancing away. "And there is Taryn. He needs stability. That is harder than it sounds when the galaxy is always pulling you in different directions." Alara listened. She had no idea what it was like to run a company or manage starships across dozens of worlds, but she understood the challenge of wanting to protect someone while also meeting endless responsibilities. Cale seemed to realize he had said more than usual. "The coffee helps," he added, giving a faint smile. They fell into a quiet rhythm over the next few nights. Cale came in, sometimes with Taryn, sometimes alone. On the nights he was with his son, Alara noticed he laughed more. On the nights he was alone, he seemed to carry the weight of the galaxy on his shoulders. One evening, during a rare quiet moment, Alara asked, "Why do you come here instead of somewhere more private? A man like you must have better options." Kyle thought about his answer. "Here, no one asks for meetings. No one wants to discuss profits or trade routes. No one treats me like a title. I can sit here, drink my coffee, and be just a man, even if only for a little while." It was the most open thing he had ever told her, and it made sense. In a galaxy full of people who wanted something from him, perhaps this small cafe was the only place where he could have nothing demanded of him. Then, as if to remind her how unusual his life truly was, an incident happened that same night. Two figures entered the cafe, station officials in dark uniforms. They spoke quietly into comms before approaching Cale's table. Alara could not hear everything, but she caught phrases like urgent and security detail. Kyle stood, thanked them, and turned to Alara. "I will be away for a few days," he said. "Business on the outer rim. Keep the coffee warm for me." And just like that, he was gone, following the officials out the door. For the next several nights, Alara found herself looking toward the door at the usual time, half expecting him to walk in. The cafe felt quieter without him, and she realized how much she had grown used to his presence. He had never been loud or demanding, but he had filled the space with a quiet gravity that was hard to ignore. When he finally returned, it was with Taryn at his side. They looked tired but unharmed. Kyle ordered his coffee, and after a few sips, glanced toward Alara. "It is good to be back," he said simply. Alara smiled. She did not need to know the details of where he had been or what business had taken him away. She only knew that the man who sat before her was more than just a customer, more than just a CEO. He was someone balancing two lives, one in the public eye and one as a father, and carrying both with the kind of quiet strength that few could manage. And though she could not explain why, she felt that somehow she was becoming a small but steady part of that balance. The night began like any other. The cafe lights glowed warmly against the cold silver walls of Nova Station's promenade. Alara moved behind the counter, wiping down the surface and checking the brewing machines. Outside, the corridor was calm, only a few late travelers passing through. It was the kind of slow evening she had grown used to. Kale arrived at his usual time, wearing the same calm expression he always carried. Tonight, however, Taryn was with him. The boy was holding a small holographic puzzle sphere, twisting it in his hands while walking beside his father. They took the corner table, and Alara served Kale his black coffee and Taryn a warm cup of sweetened milk. Taryn gave her a polite thank you before turning his attention back to the glowing puzzle. For a while, everything was normal. Kale sipped his coffee slowly, Taryn worked on his puzzle, and Alara cleaned the tables one by one. Then the first alarm sounded. It was a low, pulsing tone that ran through the floor and into the walls. The cafe lights flickered once, then twice. Alara froze for a second, glancing toward the large viewing window. Out in the darkness, far from the station's body, a faint light flashed in the void. She knew the sound. It was the station's emergency signal for a reactor or power relay issue. Kyle was already standing, scanning the room with sharp eyes. "Stay calm," he said to Taryn, his voice firm but gentle. "Stay right here." Before Alara could speak, a voice came through the station's intercom. "Attention all civilians. Please remain in secure areas. Minor reactor fluctuation detected. Security teams are responding." People in the corridor began to move faster, some heading for the nearest security gates. A couple of customers in I. The cafe stood and looked toward the exit. Alara moved to the door to pull it shut, but Kale stopped her. "Keep it open," he said. "If there is a real failure, sealed doors without emergency locks can trap people." The confidence in his tone left no room for doubt. Alara nodded and kept watch on the hallway. Taryn looked uneasy but stayed in his seat, clutching the puzzle sphere tightly. "Is it dangerous?" he asked. "Not if we handle it quickly," Kyle replied. Suddenly, another voice came over the intercom, sharper this time. "Section 7, report. Unauthorized access in Maintenance Sector 7B. Possible overload in coolant lines." Kale's head turned immediately toward the side corridor that led to the maintenance sectors. Alara saw something in his expression. Concern, but also calculation. He moved closer to her. "Where do the maintenance passages connect to the promenade?" he asked. Alara hesitated. "There is a small service hall behind the cafe. It connects to the lower decks." "Good," he said. "Show me." She blinked. "Why me? Shouldn't you call security?" "They are already moving. But if the coolant system fails, it will cut power to this entire section before they get here. You know the layout better than I do." There was no time to question further. She led him to the back of the cafe, where a narrow door marked Staff Only opened into a dim corridor. The hum of machinery was louder here, and the air felt warmer. Kyle followed close behind, his steps quick but steady. Halfway down the passage, they heard a sudden hiss, followed by the sharp smell of heated metal. Alara stopped, her heart racing. "That is the coolant line," she said. "It runs under the floor here." Kyle knelt beside a wall panel and pressed his hand to the surface. "Hot," he said. "Too hot. The pressure is building." He looked up at her. "There is a manual bypass valve near the junction ahead. If we can open it, the pressure will vent before it damages the system." She nodded quickly and guided him to the junction. It was a small chamber with low ceilings and a tangle of pipes running along the walls. A single control panel blinked with warning lights. The valve was set into the floor, protected by a heavy cover. Kale dropped to one knee and worked the latch. Open. Steam hissed out, and the heat grew stronger. "Hold this open," he told Alara, handing her the latch. She braced it while he gripped the valve handle and turned. It resisted at first, but he put his full strength into it until it finally gave way with a loud metallic groan. A rush of cool air replaced the heat, and the warning lights on the panel shifted from red to green. Kale straightened, breathing a little harder. That should stabilize it until the engineers arrive. They retraced their steps to the cafe. Taryn was still at the table, his puzzle sphere untouched. When he saw them, he jumped up and ran to his father. "You are fine," Kyle said, kneeling to meet his eyes. "Everything is under control." The boy relaxed, but Alara could still see the worry in his face. She turned to Kyle. "You knew exactly what to do. That was not the first time you have handled something like this." Kyle gave a small nod. "When you run cargo ships, you learn to fix problems before they become disasters. Waiting for someone else is not always an option." Customers were filtering back into the cafe now, some asking if the danger had passed. Alara reassured them, and soon the warm smell of coffee filled the air again. Still, her thoughts stayed on what had just happened. Kale had acted without hesitation, as if the safety of everyone there was his responsibility. He had not looked like a businessman in that moment. He had looked like a leader. When the station's security team arrived to check the maintenance passage, Kale kept his part quiet. He did not step forward to claim credit or explain his role. He simply sipped his coffee as if nothing unusual had happened. Alara knew better. She had seen the way he moved, the certainty in his actions, and the care in his voice when he spoke to Taryn. The mystery of Kale Veyron had deepened, but one thing had become clear. He was a man who could be trusted when everything else was falling apart. That night, after the cafe closed, Alara found herself thinking about how quickly he had relied on her. She was no engineer, no security officer, yet he had looked to her for guidance. It was a small connection, but it felt real. She did not know it yet, but that moment in the maintenance corridor was the beginning of something neither of them had planned. Something that would pull her further into Kale's world and into the unseen challenges he carried every day. The cafe was unusually busy for a late evening. Cargo crews from 2 newly docked freighters had filled the tables, and the air was full of the scent of roasted beans mixed with the faint tang of engine oil that clung to their jackets. Alara moved quickly between the counter and the tables, refilling cups and delivering plates. She noticed Kale enter quietly. As always, his presence calm even in the noisy room. Taryn was not with him tonight. Kale chose his usual seat in the corner, and Alara brought him his coffee without needing to ask for his order. "Taryn staying in tonight?" she asked lightly. "Yes," Kale said. "He is with his tutor in the residential wing." She nodded, then returned to serving the other customers. The station felt stable, safe. But that sense of calm broke in. An instant. A sharp alarm cut through the noise, different from the technical warnings Alara had heard before. This one was urgent, fast, and repeating. The cafe's chatter died as everyone turned toward the sound. The station's intercom came to life with a firm voice. Attention all personnel. This is a security alert. Unidentified vessels have entered restricted orbit. All civilians remain in secure zones. Security teams to docking sectors 5 and 6. The room shifted into controlled panic. People spoke in low, tense voices. Some moved quickly toward the exits, while others checked their devices for updates. Kyle set down his coffee, his eyes sharp. Alara glanced at him. "What is happening?" "Pirates," Kale said quietly. "They will not be here for trade." Before she could respond, another announcement came. "Docking Sector 6 breached. All civilian access locked down. Evacuate to nearest safe areas immediately." Kyle stood, scanning the room. His communicator buzzed, and he read the message quickly. His jaw tightened. "Taryn is in the residential wing, close to Sector 6. Alara's stomach dropped. "That is near the breach." Kale looked at her, his voice steady but urgent. "I have to get to him. The direct route is sealed. You know the station's service corridors better than most. Can you guide me?" Alara did not hesitate. "Yes." They left through the back door of the cafe, moving into the narrow staff hallway. The air felt heavier here, the hum of machinery louder than usual. Kale kept his communicator open, checking for updates. They passed storage rooms and empty service closets, their footsteps quick but careful. 2 turns later, they reached a small junction where the service corridor split. Alara stopped. "Left leads toward the lower cargo lift. It connects to the residential wing's back entrance." Kyle nodded, but before they could move, a loud metallic thud echoed from ahead. Alara froze. Footsteps approached, heavy, fast, and uneven. Kale motioned for her to stay back as 2 station security officers came into view. One of them recognized Kale instantly. "Director Varen," the officer said, slightly out of breath. "You should be in a safe room." "My son is in the residential wing," Kyle said firmly. "The main halls are sealed. We are taking the service route." The officer hesitated. "Pirates are moving through Sector 6. They may already be in those corridors." Kale's eyes hardened. "Then we move faster." The officers exchanged a quick look and decided to follow. Together, the group pushed forward. The corridor ahead was dimmer with occasional flickers from the lights. Somewhere far off, there was the faint echo of a shout, quickly followed by the sound of something heavy hitting metal. They reached the cargo lift entrance, but the control panel flashed red, locked from the main security grid. One of the officers stepped forward and began bypassing the lock with a portable tool. Alara stood beside Kyle, watching the tension in his shoulders. For all his calm, she could see the quiet urgency driving him. Finally, the panel switched to green, and the lift doors opened. They stepped inside and descended to the lower residential entrance. When the doors opened again, the corridor beyond was silent, almost too quiet. The lights here were steady, but the air felt tense. Kyle led the way now, moving with precision, checking corners before stepping forward. They reached a heavy security door that led into the residential wing. Guard stood there, weapon ready, his posture tense. He recognized Kyle immediately. "Director, your son is safe," the guard said quickly. "He is in the secure classroom with the other children." Kale's shoulders eased slightly, but he did not slow his pace until he reached the classroom. Inside, Taryn was sitting with a small group of children, speaking quietly with a tutor. When he saw his father, he jumped up and ran to him. Kale knelt, placing a steady hand on his son's shoulder. "You are safe," Kale said, relief in his voice. "We are going back to the cafe until this is over." Taryn nodded, still holding his father's arm. Alara watched them, a strange warmth mixing with the tension in her chest. She realized that in the chaos, Kale had moved with the certainty of someone used to protecting more than just himself, and he had trusted her enough to help him do it. The security team escorted them back through the service corridors. Along the way, they heard distant sounds, footsteps running above, doors slamming shut, the faint hum of weapons charging, but they saw no sign of the pirates. By the time they reached the cafe, the intercom announced that station forces had regained control of Sector 6. The pirate ships had retreated, chased off by a rapid defense response. Inside the cafe, the lights were steady, the smell of coffee unchanged. The contrast felt almost strange after the tension of the last half hour. Kyle guided Taryn to a seat, then turned to Alara. "You moved without hesitation," he said. "You could have stayed safe, but you came with me." Alara met his eyes. "I could not let you go alone." Something passed between them in that moment. Something unspoken but understood. They had faced a real danger together, and it had forged a connection beyond polite conversations and quiet coffee nights. Taryn looked up at Alara with a small smile. "Thank you," he said. "You are welcome," she replied, returning the smile. When the last customers left and the station quieted again, Kale remained at his table for a while, his son sitting close beside him. For once, Alara saw the weight on his face lift slightly. The galaxy outside was still full of challenges, but here, for this moment, he and Taryn were safe. And Alara understood now. He did not come to her cafe only for the coffee. He came because it was one of the few places where he could breathe, even when the world outside was closing in. The corridor outside the cafe was silent now, except for the low hum of the station's power systems. The emergency lights still glowed red, casting long shadows on the walls. Kyle stood by the doorway, his son Taryn holding his hand tightly. Alara stood nearby, breathing hard but steady after the tense moments they had faced together. They had reached Taryn just in time before the lockdown doors sealed completely. Kale looked at Alara, his dark eyes showing a mix of relief and gratitude. He spoke softly, as if the words had been waiting for the right moment to come out. "Thank you for helping me. If you had not been here, I do not know how I would have reached him." Alara gave a small smile and shook her head. "You would have found a way. A father always finds a way." She glanced at Taryn, who was now watching the glowing lights on the wall. "But I am glad I was here to help." They began walking back, toward the cafe through the maintenance passages. These narrow corridors were quiet, away from the noise of the main station. The sound of their footsteps echoed softly. Kyle walked beside Alara, and for the first time since she had met him, he looked less guarded. "I came to your cafe every night for more than coffee," Kyle said after a moment. "It was the only place where I could feel normal. Not a CEO, not someone people feared or wanted something from, just a man having coffee." Alara listened, surprised by his honesty. She had always thought of him as quiet, maybe shy. But now she saw that his silence came from carrying a heavy burden. She kept walking, letting him speak at his own pace. "My work takes everything from me," Kale continued. "The company, the board meetings, the travel between systems, it never stops. And when it does stop, I still have to be strong for Taryn. He lost his mother when he was very young. I promised him I would be there no matter what. But it is hard to be both a leader and a father. I feel like I am always failing at one of them." Alara slowed her steps so that Taryn could walk ahead a little, giving Kyle the space to speak, freely. "You are not failing him," she said. "He looks at you like you are his whole world. That is what matters most. Not how much time you spend at meetings or how much money you make. It is how safe he feels with you." Kale glanced at her with a faint smile, as if her words had eased something inside him. "You remind me that there are still people who see the person, not the title. That is rare in my life now." They reached the cafe door and Kale stepped aside to let Taryn in first. The warm smell of brewed coffee and baked bread filled the air, a comforting change after the cold corridors. The boy ran to the corner table where he liked to sit, pulling out his small holographic puzzle and starting to arrange the glowing pieces. Kyle stayed by the counter, watching Alara clean up some of the mess left by the earlier rush. When the pirates came, I was ready to do anything to keep Terrence safe. But you... He stopped, searching for the right words. You stepped in without hesitation. You do not know me well, yet you risked yourself for him. Alara set the cloth down and met his gaze. That is what people do for each other. You would have done the same for me. Kale studied her for a moment longer. Yes, I would have. His voice was quiet, but certain. The rest of the night passed in calm. The station's main systems came back online, and the lockdown was lifted. Most of the passengers had returned to their cabins, and the corridors outside were peaceful again. Taryn had fallen asleep at the table, his puzzle still glowing softly beside him. Kale lifted his son gently, careful not to wake him, and turned to Alara. I want you to know, he said, that tonight has changed something for me. I realized I have been holding everyone at a distance because I thought it would protect Taryn and myself, but it has only made us more alone. Alara listened quietly, not sure what to say. I will not forget what you did, Kyle went on. Not just tonight, but every night you greeted me without judgment. Every time you made this place feel like home for a few minutes. He paused, then added, and I would like to see if we can talk more. Not as a CEO and a barista, but as two people who happened to meet on Nova Station. Alara felt a warmth in her chest. I think we can do that. Kyle smiled, a real smile, not the polite one she had seen before, and then he left the cafe with Taryn in his arms. The hum of the station seemed softer now, as if the air itself had shifted. Alara stood behind the counter, thinking about the quiet man who had come in every night for coffee and how, without realizing it, they had stepped into each other's lives. That night, as she closed the cafe and turned off the lights, Alara knew that their story was not over. Somewhere out there among the stars, connections were forming in the most unexpected places, and sometimes those connections could change everything. The days on Nova Station felt different after that night. The quiet man who came every evening for coffee no longer seemed so distant. Kale Varen had slowly started to let Alara into his world, and she was beginning to see the man behind the title, the father, the leader, and the person who simply wanted a little peace. Kale kept his promise. After their conversation, he began stopping by the cafe, not just for coffee, but for talks with Alara. They shared stories, small jokes, and sometimes comfortable silences. The crowded station around them bustled as usual, but inside the cafe, a calm warmth grew. One evening, Taryn arrived with a bright smile and a small drawing clutched in his hand. I made this for you, he said, holding out the picture. It showed a cup of coffee with steam curling into stars, and beneath it, the words, "Thank you for keeping us safe." Alara's heart softened as she took the drawing. This is wonderful, Taryn. Thank you. Kale watched quietly, his eyes filled with quiet pride. He is growing fast, Kale said softly, and he already knows kindness. Over the next weeks, Alara and Kale found themselves spending more time together. She learned about the pressure he faced running one of the largest interstellar companies, managing ships, crews, and business deals. He, in turn, learned about her life on the station, the small struggles, the simple joys, and the unexpected friendships. One night, as they sat together after closing the cafe, Kale spoke about his hopes. I want Taryn to grow up in a world where he feels safe and loved. Not just because of my company or my title, but because of the people around him. Alara nodded. And you have people who care. You don't have to carry it all alone. Kyle smiled. A real, honest smile. I am learning that. Then came a quiet moment when neither of them spoke. Outside, the stars of the station's viewports twinkled like tiny fires against the dark. Alara felt something shift inside her, a feeling of trust and hope. The months that followed were not without challenges. There were business crises, unexpected calls, and moments when Kale had to leave quickly. But now, he had someone to come. Back to a small place of warmth in the vastness of space. Taryn grew closer to Alara as well, often asking questions about the cafe or asking for stories about the people she met. Alara enjoyed these moments, watching the boy's curious mind at work and feeling part of something bigger than herself. One afternoon, during a rare break in Kale's schedule, they sat together watching the station's sun rise over the docking bays. Kale took Alara's hand gently. I never expected to find peace here, he said. Or to find someone I trust. Alara smiled back. Sometimes, the most important things come when we least expect them. He nodded, and for a moment, the busy galaxy felt far away. Two people, sharing a quiet moment in the middle of the stars. Their story had started with simple coffee cups and quiet nights, but it had grown into something more, a bond built on trust, courage, and kindness. Kale was no longer just the lonely CEO or the single father carrying a heavy burden. He was a man learning to open his heart, with Alara by his side. And for Alara, the cafe was no longer just a place of work, but a place where new beginnings blossomed. Together, they faced the future, not as strangers, but as friends and partners ready to meet whatever the galaxy had in store.